Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Andy Fellows. I make videos on destructive cults, damaging norms and just generally bad ideas. Before we get started, I just want to take 1 second to tell you about my Patreon. If you haven't heard me talk about my Patreon yet, then you might not know that actually over on my Patreon there's a podcast that's going out every month at the moment. I'm talking to a co-host. We're discussing cults from a more personal point of view based on our own experiences and sharing our opinions a little bit more. As well, on my Patreon, there's all kinds of stuff, behind the scenes content, the occasional little insight into what's going on behind the scenes of this channel. If that kind of thing interests you, then please consider becoming a patron. To get access to the podcast, you need to become a patron at the $5 level, at the supporter tier level. That's just $5 a month. You get access to the podcast and everything in the insider tier as well. That said, let's get on with this video. Today, I am joined by another former Tealer, someone who was involved in Teal Tribe following Teal Swan, just like I was a few years back. My guest today is Jess, and Jess was a follower of Teal from 2012 for 5 years, all the way to 2017. She has a diploma in counseling and she's worked as a counselor. She's also studied hypnotherapy and NLP. Currently, Jess is studying to become an English and psychology teacher for secondary school students. Jess feels that the processes that Teal encouraged while she was a follower of Teal had a detrimental effect on her. She is currently recovering from PTSD that is the result of what she believes to be circumstances she ended up in because of Teal Swan's influence. Now, as someone who has faced backlash for speaking out before, I recognize that doing this kind of thing it's not an easy thing to do. And what Jess is doing today and speaking about this and telling her story is incredibly brave. So I would just like to ask if there's any Tealers watching this video, that you can please find it within yourself to be respectful in the comments. It doesn't take much. It doesn't cost anything. Please just be decent. That said, I would like to welcome my guest today, Jess. Welcome to the channel. First of all, it's good to have you here. Do you want to go ahead and just tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Teal Swan and Teal Tribe and all of that?
Yeah, sure. So I actually came across Teal through my sister, who had recorded a bunch of new age spiritual clips from, like, she took them from YouTube and put them on a DVD for me.
It's enthusiastic.
Yeah. So that included the hidden human history movie from Spirit Science, I think it was called.
Classic, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had seen that, and that made complete sense to me at the time because I have a Mormon background, so like a religious upbringing, and I mean, it didn't seem that far-fetched considering I already had religious thinking. So yeah, and in that DVD there was a Teal Swan video, or I think a few, but one in particular I remember seeing quite a lot, which was how to discover what you want. And I think that had a profound impact on me. So it's just one that I remember very clearly. And I really, at the time, I thought she was completely logical. Everything made a lot of sense. After revisiting that same video, I have a lot of thoughts that differ from when I first watched. But yeah, that's how I was introduced.
Cool. So looking back on that video, just if we just like stop there for a second on this video, looking back at that, what jumps out at you like the most glaring thing there as being, you know, something you don't agree with now, or something that you think very differently on now?
One of the most important things that sticks out to me is that she discourages asking yourself questions. She says that if you ask yourself what you want, like what do I want, that you're vibrating at the frequency of the question and therefore can't attract the answer. So
okay.
So to be consistent with that, it's like it's in a way subtly telling you not to ask questions, because questions don't give you answers. And
so how do you get answers then?
yeah, the way she I took some notes on it, so I'm just going to like take
Okay.
a look
Yeah, go for it. Go
at
for it.
that. She encouraged visualizing what it might feel like to have the answer. So that
Okay.
was, and she also got into details about, well, not details really, but she mentioned that not to be specific because
Mm,
you'd be disabling the universe, limiting the universe by giving specific details on how you want that thing to come to you. So you have to just focus on the root desire. So something like happiness is what I want, and
mm.
the universe will provide for you and give
In
that to you.
just whatever way it wants to, in whatever
Yeah,
way that's right for your vibration or whatever.
yeah. But if you say
Yeah.
how, like I want money or I want a relationship and I want to be with this particular person, that's limiting the universe. So that really stood out because I just felt that it was just way too vague, and
Yeah.
it almost seemed to me like a way of her getting away with
Hmm.
claims that the law of attraction doesn't work.
It does feel a
Because
bit like a cop out, doesn't it? Yeah.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
well, that's because you're being too specific about
Mm,
something. That those were my thoughts about it. It's
mm,
just that it seemed it did seem like a cop out to me.
yeah.
Um, there were a few other things that I mentioned. I took note on when I was rewatching. Like the way she words things is the universe doesn't worry about what you want, so there's no wrong answer. So she's talking about the universe as a conscious entity that can worry or not worry about something.
Mm,
And she speaks as if she knows what the universe can and can't worry about,
mm.
if you get me. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so already she's subtly, in my opinion anyway,
Mm,
made herself an authority because she has a direct connection to source or the
mm,
universe, and therefore she's like the channel between what the universe wants to tell you and um, yeah, like she's a direct line
mm.
between
Yeah.
yeah, not like she mentions too there are no mistakes. You can't make mistakes in the universe. So everything that happens is happening as it should. It's right. Everything that you want is right. There's no mistake about that, which is also a concern considering there are a lot of things that
Mm.
could be
Yeah.
changed if we yeah we'll get into that. I think that'll be important.
And there's also a lot of dark ways that that can go as well. There's a lot of really troubling directions that that could be taken in, I think. So for anyone who's listening to that and they want to and you want to see that video, I'll include that link in the description so people can go ahead and check that one out.
One
Okay.
other thing I noticed was she contradicts herself. So at the beginning of the video she says that you can't ask the question because then you can't be a match to the answer.
Mm.
And then later in the video she says, I want you to something like have the guts to ask yourself, what do I want? So then she's telling you to ask yourself what you want.
Mm. Yeah, no, yeah.
It's I realized I didn't notice that at the time
Mm.
because watching her videos, I'm sure a lot of people, and yourself included, would relate that her videos can be quite hypnotic. So
Mm.
you just you're just flowing with her words, and
Mm.
at that point, it's just you don't notice those inconsistencies. You
Yeah.
just trail
And
it.
by the end, you've forgotten what's happened at the beginning.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think I think yeah, I could relate to that. Yeah, I mean, even now when I watch, I try to avoid watching her videos, and I'd rather just pick over the blog posts because it's hard to. You have to stop it and then go away and like, right, what was actually said there? Because she's moving on to
mm,
something else, and it's all there's so many layers to it as well. It's like
yeah,
baffling, honestly baffling, and it's just a very strange it's a very strange experience,
mm,
especially now looking back, as I'm sure you found when you were watching that video there. It's like this at the time, if you don't know to pick it over, if you don't know to evaluate it in that critical way, it washes over you certain things fall into place. The rest of it you just miss, just goes over your head or whatever. But then when you look back later, you're like, hang on a minute. And this was the truth to me then for a minute, or for however long it was for, it's like, concerning stuff. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
She basically encourages just, in the video, focusing on what you want and desire. And if that changes, like the finish line always moves forward. So you'll always want something else. And that's just the way of things. So she encourages going with your desire so much that it, in my opinion, takes away the element of logical thinking and planning that should also come into that, not just based on feeling. Like, I want you to feel into your what you want and go with that, which I think there's a lot of in Teal Tribe. I've noticed there's a lot of just feeling into things and going with your desire constantly, to the point where, considering that desires change a lot and what we want changes a lot, it just doesn't always work in our world. Like, I think that led me into a lot of unfortunate situations where I would give up on something I was doing, like a study or a job, because it's no longer what I wanted at that time. But the next day I may have been fine with it, but I just thought, that's not what I want now, so I'll stop. And there was no critical thinking involved because I was following the advice of Teal, which, in that video.
Yeah. So there's something that sticks out to me there that reminds me of something that was in Kathleen Taylor's Brainwashing that you commented on my channel, which went into my head, and then I went to read without, I think I didn't know that it was you that had commented that at the time, but then thinking back, yes, it was you. There's a point there in that book where Kathleen Taylor talks a bit about the agentic state, and I wonder whether this is an example of that. Just getting into this, not thinking too much. And I'm not no expert on this, and I'm always really clear about that on the channel. Please look it up for yourself, make your own mind up. But I would wonder whether what you're describing there fits into that kind of agentic state, the kind of not thinking, just kind of doing stuff, just going through the motions to an extent. And it kind of fits into what Hassan talks about in with cults, is kind of keeping people busy, keeping people doing things with menial tasks and things like that. It could fall into that a little bit as well, although obviously what we're talking about here is a little bit more driven by your own personal whims, and really it does seem like it's whims. In my experience, that was the case as well. Like, it's just whatever you feel in that moment's the most important thing, and don't worry about the future, don't worry about the bigger picture. It's what matters most to you in that moment. And as you say, that's going to change, and so you just end up being cast about on the winds of desire forevermore and not really going anywhere. And I know for me that was the case. I ended up in a difficult situation, but we will get into that for you obviously as we move through the story. So you found that video, and that was your first exposure to Teal. That's the case? Yeah. So what happened then? You watched that video. What happened next for you?
I think a lot of people can probably relate to this, but it just ended up, I went on YouTube for myself and just binge watched her videos, which is pretty much what a lot of Tealers do, just binge watch her videos and then look forward to every new video that comes out. You're just like hanging out for it because you need the next week of insight from Teal. And that's just what happened for me. I became reliant on like my perception of the world around me and what was going on and how I should, I guess, address different situations in my life. It was based on, well, what would Teal say about that? And I would sometimes even search for a video that would relate to that specific thing, because I didn't want to make a decision or think wrongly about it, because I might attract the wrong kind of situation into my life if I think wrongly about it. And that's where I think thought control in the bite model, Stephen Hassan's bite model, comes into it too. Is with the law of attraction, it's even thinking something the wrong way is very much something that she speaks against, because it's like you'll attract the wrong thing. Well, not the wrong thing, but something that you don't really want.
I mean, thought
So
creates reality, right? So
yeah,
it kind of comes down to that thing. And yeah, I can relate to that as well. I was the same, just watching video after video. Yeah.
yeah.
So from that, how did that change your life at all in that moment? Like, were things being affected around you as you were, going into watching these videos a lot? What happened next for you?
Well, at the time, so I was only 15 or 16 when I first started
Mm,
watching. And I was having trouble at school with friends, and I just always felt a little different, like I was being excluded a lot.
mm,
And I think eventually, well, with Teal and with Teal Tribe, which came a bit later, I think, I felt this sense of belonging and connection with people who were like-minded.
mm,
And so it really drew me into feeling that sense of connection with people online, really. And the people around me that I saw and just had physical contact with, my relationship with them was poor and often deteriorating. And I became very preachy, so I would speak like Teal. I would call myself an empath because, and that was like something that qualified me to be able to say or tell people
mm,
how to live, because I, in a way, had like a psychic ability where I could
mm,
uh, feel what others felt. And I would say this to myself, sometimes even before that person knew that they felt that way. Like sometimes people don't even know what they're feeling, but I would be able to sense what they're feeling
mm,
before they knew.
mm,
And that to me showed a lot of Teal's influence, because
mm,
she had, I guess, that way of, or has that way of speaking sometimes, where she implies that there's something she knows about you that that you don't, or you may not be aware of. And I took
mm,
that on board as well, and I just started like mirroring. Like I could almost guess what she would say before she said it to people at workshops or in interviews. It was like I just, her way of thinking was so embedded in my brain. And yeah, eventually that led to me being involved in the online community, seeking connection with people overseas a lot more than people around me. I started communicating with a man from the US, and he didn't know about Teal. I actually introduced him to Teal, but I knew him through, he was a music producer, so he made like music on YouTube, and that's how I came across him. We got in contact. We started talking a lot, emailing each other, talking on Facebook and Skyping, and we fell in love. And I had this idea in my head that he was my twin flame, which was another thing that I think was influenced by Teal. I had
mm.
seen, I think she has 2 videos on twin flames. Yeah, but I had seen her videos on that, and I thought he was my twin flame. So with that kind of thinking and the
Just
lack of,
one second, sorry. For anyone who's
sure.
not familiar with twin flames, would
Oh
you like
yeah,
to just go over that a little bit, just to
yeah.
clear that up?
Okay, sure. So a twin flame is like your other half, essentially. This is something worth mentioning as well. So there's a typical New Age way of seeing the twin flame, which is kind of like a soul is like this clump of energy or something, where that can be split in two, and you have like your other self that you find in the world, and the attraction is very intense.
Mm,
But Teal, in her video, speaks against that way of thinking, because she mentions that the physical reality we live in is an illusion. So the reality, like on higher dimensions, is that we're streams of consciousness that come from source energy, which would be like the ocean. And then there are the streams of consciousness that trickle down from there. And that your twin flame is actually like from those streams, you can have different creeks. Like you might have one creek and then another creek. And it's those creeks that manifest as physical reality, which is what we perceive. And so in a way, I thought my twin flame, meaning the other creek, I thought I had met him through, my ex, who eventually came to Australia on a visa. And just that whole experience. We got married as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but the whole experience that this led me into, from what I now perceive to be delusional thinking, it was quite traumatic for me, and I'm still recovering from a lot of that. And another thing with what a lot of people in the New Age will be familiar with, but some of you may not, is that there's a lot of talk about, with twin flames, there's a lot of turmoil sometimes between yourself and your twin flame, because you're mirroring each other's insecurities and shadows. And the shadow is like the darker parts of your unconscious mind. So with that in mind, any issue that came up, anything that should have been a red flag between myself and my ex, I perceived as being more proof that he was my twin flame, and that I just had to work through it. And that if I released resistance to to these things, that I would actually heal our relationship.
I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to. My experiences with, in terms of relationships and this kind of thing, have been different, but I could definitely understand how that kind of thinking, if I'd got into that way of thinking, things could have gone very differently for me. And I just know that there's other people that have been through something like what you're talking about there, that have ended up in a very similar situation. Yeah.
It's probably worth mentioning too that the whole idea of him being my twin flame was so much that actually I mentioned he was a music producer, and he was a rapper as well, so he would rap over the songs that he made. And one of the songs he dedicated to me before he actually came here, it was called Twin Flame, so it was a whole rap about us being twin flames. So I already had that worked up in my mind so much before he even came to Australia. But yeah, I just think that the influence Teal had on me at the time, and just my whole outlook of the world, and how relationships work, I think that really led me into blaming myself a lot for any emotional abuse, sexual abuse, or even occasionally physical abuse that happened, because I felt I was attracting that. I was a match to the situation, and it was because of my shadow or something. So it was something I really obviously now regret strongly, but I think it really woke me up as well. And it's part of what led me to question Teal. So it got me to a point where I started to realize, after just years of the same thing, and trying to work through my own shadow and release resistance, so come to accept certain aspects of my shadow, my insecurities. I had done those things, and yet things still weren't changing. And I realized after a while, my outlook became more and more, I guess, just a bit cynical, but I would say I just became more skeptical of people in general. I didn't really trust things as easily, or people as easily. And while it would sometimes go to the extreme, so just not trusting anyone, even when it would have been okay to. When I leveled out in a way and I found a balance, that sense of distrust actually served me very well, because it got me to a point where I was able to get out of that situation and eventually decide to separate from my partner and divorce.
Wow.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, when all's said and done, I'm glad you managed to get out of it and that things are improving now. You're not
Thank
dealing
you.
with that anymore. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know whether this goes too close to the whole situation, but so if it does, then feel free not to answer include this. But I tend to ask people, if there was a moment that you stopped believing in Teal, stopped believing in the law of attraction, or any of that kind of stuff, and it may be different moments, what would that be for you?
I'd say there were a few different things that came into it, like just noticing. I mean, what I already mentioned had a huge impact. I think that was why I started to question her a bit more. But also, so I was subscribed to her premium content. And I would watch her workshops, and already at the time I didn't really trust her as much, or just spirituality in general, because like I just started to lose faith in a lot of things that happened naturally over time. But I think there was a bit of cognitive dissonance. I believed, but I didn't at the same time. So I mean, I was still giving her money, like I was subscribed to her. And yeah, when I was watching one of her workshops, it would be great if I had a link to it or something, or could remember which specific one it was, but I don't. So I'm just relying on my memory for this. But there was a moment where she said to the audience, "I know I'm the most beautiful woman in this room." And then she proceeded to say, and see, that resistance she felt to the statement that I just made is representative of insecurities in your shadow and the way women interact with each other, because women have a shaming culture where they have to shame themselves in order to be accepted by other women. And because I didn't do that, there's a lot of resistance that you've just felt to that. And there were a few things that went through my head when I heard that. Because I realized that it's fine to be, it's one thing to say, I think I'm beautiful. And it's another thing to say, I'm the most beautiful woman in this room. And at the same time, as you say that, you're belittling every other woman there and making them feel like they're not at your level of attractiveness.
Which
And
is
I just felt,
ironic when you consider that she was saying that the reason people felt resistance to that was because there's a competition or something, right? There's like a shaming
yeah,
culture or something, which is she's
yeah,
kind of still doing that in saying that.
yeah.
Doesn't, to me, that doesn't add up. Go on,
No, it
sorry.
doesn't. It doesn't. It just, in my opinion, is really manipulative. I perceived it to be that way. It's like she made a statement that was clearly, she knew that people would have objections to that. And before they could even think about it, she was already explaining herself. And I had already been subject to manipulation from the partner that I had and a few other people in my life, which I won't mention the names or anything. But there have been people in my life who have been quite like grandiose, narcissistic, and manipulative. So I was pretty familiar with that way of talking, where someone would elevate themselves, and while they're doing that, they're really belittling you. It's like there's this strange, it's a bit, it's like got two sides to it. And I just thought to myself, well, how is it, like, if anyone else said that same thing, would I be okay with that? And I wasn't. I just thought, if anyone else said that, I would think this person is really horrible. Like they're manipulative. They just said a horrible thing. And yet what I noticed and what concerned me was no one in the audience spoke up. And I started to think about why. So why is no one saying anything? And like, why are they just awkwardly giggling? And I just thought, well, my interpretation of that is that they're scared, that they're afraid of losing the community that like of people that they've become friends with. They're afraid of being judged or shamed for speaking up against Teal, because Teal is an authority and she knows better. She knows what the universe wants for you and so forth. So to be questioning Teal would be like questioning the universe or some ultimate authority. And I just thought that undying loyalty, where there was no questioning, that really fit into Stephen Hassan's bite model as well, which I had already been looking into because, at the time I was trying to research as much as possible to gain clarity about my relationship. So, with that, it just seemed like not being able to ask questions that really stood out to me. Is that even though she never directly says, don't ask questions or don't question my authority, it's implied in a lot of ways. And it still happens where even if Teal doesn't say it, if you do ask questions or criticize Teal or have an objection, someone else in Teal tribe will probably shame you for that. So
I mean, there's a whole conversation about conformity and like the ironically tribal mentality of this kind of a situation, and how when you put a group of people together and the way that people act becomes is a very different thing than if it was just one person saying what they were thinking. And then you add to that, as Hassan talks about as well, cult identity, and as you described there, the potential for there to be fear of questioning the leader and questioning on things at the risk of losing something that you value. So for you, towards the end of your time there, you were starting to question these things. Did you leave Teal Tribe in any decisive moment, or did you leave at all? Were you kicked out? Like, how did this happen? Because I know there's all sorts of different stories for people leaving voluntarily and not so voluntarily. What was your story there?
Sure. So it took me a while to actually get out of Teal Tribe. I stuck around even when I no longer believed Teal was all she said she was. But so a lot of the time I just started posting things about, like, if I saw a similarity between something Teal said and something I had researched. So for example, studying like counseling and NLP, which with NLP I now realize there's a lot of they get a lot of the philosophies of NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming, if people don't know what that is. They get a lot of those theories from cognitive behavioral therapy. So there's a lot of crossover, and that's a whole topic in itself. I don't really subscribe to NLP anymore, aside from just it being interesting because I know other people use it. But yeah, I noticed some similarities, and I would post about that. So one example was Cameron Clark. I don't know if you've heard of her, but
Yes,
Cameron Clark is for people who don't know, she was living with Teal at one stage, and she left because there was a whole range of issues that happened. I mean, I'd recommend for anyone to watch her interviews. Maybe that's something you can link in the description as well.
Yes, I can do. Yeah, I need to rewatch them, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could do with finding those.
Yeah, but she did mention at one stage that Teal had like researched about NLP. So I now know that the thoughts I had before about some of the similarities between what Teal said and neurolinguistic programming is kind of confirmed by Cameron Clark. And that was in relation to fragmentation or parts work. So Teal, in more recent years, has started talking about fragmentation, which is her way of saying it. But really, it's just parts work in NLP. So I would encourage anyone to look up parts work.
She's actually done a video on that recently in name exactly parts work, which I'm yet to trawl through. But yeah, that's gone out recently.
Well, I wonder if she does actually make mention of NLP or not. In many of her videos, because I haven't seen that video, so but in many of her videos, I know she just doesn't give credit where credit's due. So, I mean,
yeah, no, I think we've seen a little bit of that on my channel recently as well. We've put a few videos up about that one. Yeah.
Yes. So I did post in Teal Tribe anyway about that. I said, do you realize that parts work is not Teal's creation? Like, this is something that I've studied in NLP, and this has been around for way longer than Teal's even existed. So, and I mentioned that, and it's not just in NLP. It's also something called structural dissociation of the personality. It's a theory in psychology, and it talks about the same thing. It's people who have, when you've been through trauma and you dissociate, your mind kind of splits in a way into different parts so that you can make peace with certain situations. It's quite in depth, but it's something that people can do their own research on. But I did post about that, and no comments, no likes, no one, like, I was just completely ignored. And that was happening quite a bit. So I felt like I wasn't really getting across to people, which is the only reason I was in the group anymore, is I wanted to see if I could have people wake up a little bit and start questioning that. It just wasn't happening. And also in relation to some of the people who have been in Teal Tribe would be familiar with how emotional, deeply emotional and dark things can get in there sometimes. And people would even record videos of themselves crying and suicidal, and they're just having complete breakdowns. And there's a lot of emphasis on validation. So while I think validation works very well and it's very important, it's kind of like people in Teal Tribe, I notice, get stuck in this loop of validation, where they think that if they just get enough validation, they're going to heal and things in their life will change. So I just noticed that dependency, and I started commenting on some people's posts without being insensitive. I didn't want to be insensitive. I was very careful because I know that when someone's not doing well emotionally, if they think you're saying something like, "Oh, suck it up," or like, I would never say something like that. But I did want to say, so I would validate them, but then I would mention some actual practical tips that they could use to move forward, and suggest that they get professional help or things like that. And there was this one negative experience I had with someone who she was being pretty aggressive to me. And I don't remember the exact details, but it was enough for me to just feel that I had enough of the group. I thought, okay, no one's stepping in. Everyone's just fine with her being, like, attacking me, being emotionally abusive to me, accusing me of things that, like, are just awful, considering I was actually trying to help. And yeah, I just felt it was toxic. I didn't didn't want to stay, so I left at some point.
Did you have any friends that you'd made in the group while you were there?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, someone who I'm still great friends with today, who is actually, I never spoke up about Teal until I could have a conversation with him about this. Mittel, his name is. He's actually in your group on Facebook.
Okay. Oh, cool.
He's the one that invited me to the group, because I
Cool.
introduced him to you, and then through your videos, I guess he found your group. And yeah, I am really good friends with him, and I didn't feel comfortable saying anything, openly about Teal until I knew that I wouldn't lose him, which is, I think, once again, sort of comes in a little bit to what I was talking about before, that fear of losing your community or people that you're connected to. I think it just makes it so that even if you do have questions, you might not openly talk about it or anything, because you just don't want to lose people. So
also, you're not allowed to ask questions. So
yeah,
you have to vibrate in the frequency of the answer.
yes, exactly. So I did make some good friends. I made other friends as well, but I haven't kept in contact with most of them. The only significant friendship that I've kept has been with Mittel. And this was late last year, actually, that I said I have to be honest with you. Because he was posting a lot of quotes from Teal, and I think he posted, or he recommended I watch one of Teal's videos, and that's when I said I have to tell you my thoughts. I'm quite against Teal at this stage, and I'm scared of how you're going to react to this. But he took to it really well. He was really kind, and he's a smart guy. So so he actually he was fine with being skeptical and questioning her. It hurt, and it was an uncomfortable process, as many people know that it's always uncomfortable when you start questioning someone you've just idolized, which I did. So I could empathize with that. But yeah, it's in the end, it's worked out. So
yeah, and well done for being able to have that kind of a conversation, because it's not easy, and it's not always something that you can be successful with if someone's so convinced of something like that. But what's incredible is that you were able to protect friendship, and that survived that difficult conversation. I think that's something that I've heard, and I repeat all the time, is protect your relationships with people that are in these groups, because that's the thing that's going to help stay connected with them as people before and beyond the issues of the group. And it sounds like that's what you did there. And I'm really glad to hear that. And having spoken to Mittel myself, he's a great guy, and actually pulled up something for me with the quotes video that I was able to correct in my video about Bratzo. So I'm really grateful for that as well. So in terms of your connections that you made, did you end up speaking out publicly on maybe your own private Facebook or anything like that?
I actually haven't done that yet.
Okay.
But I've been
video is
thinking,
gonna it's gonna do something, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, actually, I have been thinking, after I had this conversation with Mittel, I had been thinking that I really needed to, I wanted to make a video about Teal. I just haven't found the right time. And I think every time I've tried to do it, I've sat down and just been like, I'm gonna record today and do this, I just feel like I'm not prepared exactly. So, and maybe it's something to do with just it being not having much direction or knowing where to start. But I think it's been good that this is my first opportunity to really speak up about it, because it's helpful to have someone asking questions, and it gives me a bit more clarity. I don't feel so alone on it. And I really I think it's wonderful that, and very brave of you, to have just done what you did on YouTube, making videos about teal, considering the backlash. So yeah, you actually inspired me quite a lot to, like, when I was thinking about making videos myself, I was thinking, well, whatever Andy's doing, I want to have the guts to do that. So yeah.
Oh, thank you for the kind words, and I'm glad that I was able to help you to feel like it was something that you could do. I will warn anyone that wants to, the backlash isn't nice. And
Mm-hmm.
since I started doing this, I've had a constant influx of negative comments about me as a person, about making assumptions about why I'm doing this and all kinds of stuff. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how much you choose to ignore it, you're gonna see them sometimes, and they do get in your head. So, as long as anyone feels prepared for the potential of that kind of stuff, the impact of that kind of stuff, then I feel like if it's something that people want to do, then they should definitely consider it. And
Mm.
it's great to hear that you're feeling like you want to do that. Yeah, because I really feel like with this kind of thing, the important thing is not for there to be an anti-teal campaign. It's for
Mm.
people to be critical and to be skeptical, and
Yeah.
and to pick these ideas apart too. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the same with religion as well. These things shouldn't get a free pass. They should
Yeah.
be examined. They should be in the same way that you examine anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else in your life, these things shouldn't get a free pass. It doesn't matter how much a person has helped you or you feel a person has helped you. It doesn't matter how much an idea seems to be cut above the rest or sacred or holy. It's still an idea, and it
Yeah.
needs to, it should stand up to scrutiny. And if it does, no harm, right?
Yeah.
No harm by looking into it. Um, but yeah,
Exactly.
I'm really glad to hear that, and I'm glad that what I've done has been able to help, because really that's why I'm doing it. It's for people who are in the position that we were in,
Mm.
who thought they had the answer, and then it turns out maybe not, and things get harder, and then you need a way out, and then at the end of it, you're like, what just happened to me? What was this? What did I just go
Mm.
through? And yeah, and now you're trying to make sense of it, and I hope that my videos serve as a resource for that. So
Oh yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
cool.
And what I found amazing too is that, with your videos, I had already looked up, the bite model. Like, I came across Stephen Hassan, and because of that, I related even more to your videos,
Mm,
because I felt like I actually have some videos on the bite model myself, and undue influence, and I wanted to get to a point where I could then tie those things in with my own experience.
mm.
And so that's why I also appreciated your videos even more, because I just thought that's exactly what I would like to do. Yeah, so thanks for that.
You're welcome. And as much as I'm enjoying this, just talking about how great my channel is, let's go back to your story a little bit. Is there anything else that stands out for you in your time following Teal? Anything else that you would like to make mention of here?
One thing that comes to me at the moment is, because it's online and a lot of it is, just, you're not really seeing teal in person unless you go to a workshop or something. I think that had a lot to do with why I never perceived it to be a cult. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make. And
Mm,
even now, when people do speak up against teal, yeah, the criticisms that they get is, it can't be a cult because it's online, and there's no
mm,
penalty. Like, there's no penalty for leaving. Like, if you leave, there's not going to be any, like, no one's stopping you from doing that. But
mm,
I I think that in this day and age, we really need to consider the influence that, happens online. And I think that in my own experience, just this idea I had in my head of what cults are, it was very stereotypical, and it made it so that I was actually more susceptible to being influenced by teal, because I wasn't criticizing. I wasn't thinking rationally about it. I was accepting everything she said, and it never came across my mind that that I could be unduly influenced by someone online, just by watching videos or not even having direct conversations with them. So yeah, I think that lack of knowledge about undue influence and the fact that it can happen online is part of why I ended up in that situation. So for people watching, I would really urge them to think twice about that. There's a lot of online influence, and it's worth looking into, because knowledge is really, in my opinion, what's going to protect you against being unduly influenced.
It's something I always say on the channel. If you don't know how cults work, how could you know if you're in one? If you don't understand how undue influence works, how can you know whether you're under it or not? So that doing that research, I think, again, Hassan has said, there's no like protection necessarily, but educating yourself, getting in the know, trying to understand these things, it goes a long way to keeping you safe from them. But I also think that the moment you is the moment you're a little bit more vulnerable than you've been before, because you're like, no, I'm safe now, and then there you go, you open yourself up to it. So another question I was going to ask was, and I don't know if you covered it in what you just said there, but if you had a message for current Tealers, what would that be?
My message, I think, would just be that to trust their own mind, and that while emotions are important and they should validate their emotions, they should give themselves love and be considerate of what they feel. I would also encourage them, though, to engage their critical faculties. So to be skeptical of not just Teal, but others too, because I think that it really, when you're following Teal or any other leader who has this kind of authority, when you're following them, it makes it easier for you to get sucked into other situations where someone can just convince you of anything. That includes sales, even. Like if you're you might be more susceptible to getting into some MLM scheme, like multi-level marketing pyramid scheme or something. So it's always better to be skeptical first, and just, you can never ask too many questions. Ask as many questions as you want, and if you do have a question that comes up in your mind, just don't push it aside. Don't suppress that because you're worried about what that's going to attract for you. Some kind of like, well, I don't want to resonate or vibrate at that frequency or something. Just trust your mind above all else.
I think that's pretty good, pretty grounded advice there as well, I think. It's important, as I always feel with this kind of stuff, is that the most important part is for us to start to trust our own capacity to pick ideas apart, to think critically. It's critical thinking, skepticism are like the most important things, I think, here. And again, if it stands up to scrutiny, no harm done by trying to pick it apart, which is a shorter reiteration of something that Lloyd said on his channel, on John Cedar's channel. So let me just end this by saying thank you so much for joining me here, for telling your story. I know it's going to help a lot of people. And again, I want to recognize you for being brave, for sitting here and for sharing this today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on your channel.
Thanks for watching, and I hope that you got something from this video. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you like the kind of videos I'm making and you want to help support the channel, the best way to do that is by becoming a patron. You just click the link in the description below. That will take you to Patreon. You can go ahead there, become at least a $5 level supporter, tier patron, and you're going to get access to the podcast I mentioned. And I will see you in the next one. But let me just say, and this is something I might start saying in my videos, please be kind and ask good questions. I'll see you in the next one.